So the core is by far one of the most important things you need to train. It's often one that's missed or left at the end of a program, but the core allows you to accept force, produce force, manipulate your body in specific positions required for the sport. So it's one of those really important ones that a lot of people miss.
Hey there, welcome to our podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, could you please do us a solid? If you're enjoying what you hear, give us a 5-star rating and hit that subscribe button on your platform. It really helps us reach more parents, coaches, and youth in the youth athlete development scene. All right, let's get into this week's chat.
And then, did you have anything else to add to that, Dave?
No, that was all very clear. So I guess if we break it down into the simplest form, it's basically we're looking at the squat being a knee-dominant movement, a hinge being a hip-dominant movement. So need to train both the knee and the hip and its respective muscles, looking at your pushing and pulling movements, both in the vertical and horizontal movement patterns, and the core being able to extend, so move your back backwards.
Yes.
Moving forward really quickly in space to maybe pick up a ball, being able to bend or rotate very rapidly, but also to stiffen up and resist these movements as well, say in a tackle, or say you've taken a mark and now you need to stiffen up, things like that. So the core is probably by far one of the most important things you need to train. It's often one that's missed or left at the end of a program, but the core allows you to accept force, produce force, manipulate your body in specific positions required for the sport. So it's one of those really important ones that a lot of people miss.
Great summary.
Yeah.
The other thing as well is that, and I want to go too in depth, but we got to make sure that the order of the exercises are correct. Like, typically we like compound multi-joint movements, which is why these are really important, because a lot of our sport movements are multiple things are happening. Your shoulder joints going, your ankle, your elbow, your wrist. If it's upper body movement, lower body, it's your hip, your knees, your ankles. They're all incorporated. So we want to make sure that our gym movements sort of incorporate that. The other thing as well is that we've got to be mindful of what reps, sets, intensities that we're using, right? So we got to make sure that they're attached to what the goals are. If it's hypertrophy training, which is building muscle, if it's max strength or strength training, if it's, hey, we actually want you to be a bit more powerful, the reps, sets, and intensities change. So we won't go into that today, but we got to just be mindful that although the movements might be a good program, we've got to make sure also the intensities, the reps, the sets, the volume that we go through are appropriate for the athlete and the season and the phase of season they're in. Pre-season, in-season, off-season, they're all going to be different. So really important that we do identify what's best for that athlete. Okay, so that's the strength movements. They're the areas that we need to make sure that we're developing. Now, once we've done and gone through sort of the full body movements, right? The lower body, the upper body, we want to then now move into some accessory strength work. So we've done the multi-joint movements, compound lifts, really important that our athletes go through those movements, but there might be some sort of isolated or accessory work that these athletes that we have might need to do some extra work. So this might depend on their assessment. It might be where we need to address some of the maybe imbalances or compensations that an athlete might be going through. So we would then formulate some exercises or put some isolated stuff. So we all know that hamstring issues and tears and things like that around that area is quite common in, like, let's say footy, for example. Okay, hamstring tears. So we've found in a lot of research that doing a bit of extra hamstring work that's isolated can be very helpful. So you might actually start to put some things like some Nordics or some hamstring curls or some isometric work and holds and things like that are going to be beneficial for the athlete. So that's the sort of the other area of the strength side of things. We've got to make sure that not only are we doing all the main movements that's going to transfer into our sport, but what are some movements or some exercises that's going to help with the tissue tolerance and making sure that our muscles can actually are balanced and ensure that we're in the right we're hitting the right things to make sure that athlete is So once they've worked through some of that, those exercises to help with, for example, those hamstrings, okay, we would then move into maybe some injury prevention movements. So it might be some stability work, it might be some mobility work, it might even be some core work that's going to be specific to maybe some injury prevention. Okay, so again, hamstring tears is something that we want to prevent. So those isolated movements that's putting some extra sort of stress on the hamstring is going to help them adapt and develop. Some other sort of examples might be adductor strength. So you might do some what we call Copenhagen's in order to improve the strength of the adductors, which is our groin muscles. Okay, so these are some other examples of when we would put some accessory work for injury prevention. Which is really important. But in programs, let's say for off-season or pre-season, we might have athletes that are wanting just to put on some muscle. So we might need to really put, add some more volume. So we might add some more multiple joint movements, but we might even throw some things in there like your bicep curls, your tricep extensions, your things like that really isolate one muscle at a time. And this is where those single joint or single muscle exercises are going to be relevant for those. So to recap that strength side of things, or the accessory side of things, we want to make sure that we've got exercises in there that helping for injury prevention, but we've also got exercises in there that's going to help with either balancing out the athlete or helping with putting on some size or putting some body armor on for the athlete. So once we've sort of worked through that, then we're going to go through the energy system development. So for that part of things, it's for those not too sure about what energy systems are, it's pretty much the developing the body's ability to utilize energy in our body, and a lot of that comes from our cardiovascular training. So cardio training, okay, although strength and conditioning training or strength training does help with all of that, things like your anaerobic and aerobic training. So that might be sort of your HIIT programs, high intensity interval training, might be used at the end of the program. It might be that they need to do some sort of long distance, low intensity distance work or steady state work, which is something that we might typically add at the end of the program, because we wanted the explosive, more energy exerting stuff first, and then we sort of top up or work on a couple of other things to finish off the session. And now, not something that we typically have to always program. It will depend on the athlete, because we know that especially in season, our athletes, might have 2-3 training sessions a week. They might have skill coaches, so them doing some other work. So that additional cardiovascular training might not be relevant for them at that time or in that part of the season. However, if we are working with endurance athletes, there might be some extra sort of endurance sessions they might do, and you might need to do that for a separate session. It might not be in this current session. So let's say that they've done the bulk of the program, they've done they've done their warm up, the power movements, the strength stuff, and they've added a bit of conditioning just in case they need it. Okay, as a bit of a top up. That's the energy system side of things, and then we've pretty much finished off with a cool down and most of that. And when you think about it, our body's really warm, really maybe a bit of fatigue and things like that. Now we've got to sort of kickstart the recovery process. Okay, so we're going to go from that fight flight system to now rest and digest. So what are some strategies to cool down? You shouldn't be just sort of doing a session. You've done some really hard workouts. You've done some really intense athletic movements. You've done some strength movements, maybe with a bit of resistance and things like that. So it's quite intense. The body's probably fatigued. Okay, now we need to actually we shouldn't just be walking out of the gym. We should start to think about, okay, how can we now start to bring the heart rate down, maybe focus on our breathing a little bit. And some strategies that we use is, we might do a bit of stretching. We might do one of our favorite ones is some box breathing. So we'll put our legs up on a box and just focus on our breathing, and really bring our breath and heart rate down, and really get as much oxygen into the body, and just keep us calm, because when you're calm, your nervous system actually switches into this mode of, okay, well, I don't need to be sort of awake and all of that, which is that, that fight flight side of things. And then we want to sort of kickstart that rest digest by just calming down, cooling down, and that will just start the process of recovering. So yeah, that's pretty much some of the things there. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, just for the cool down, you can imagine, say you've done a really hard interval session on the bike, you're going to have a lot of blood pooling around the legs.
That's
So
right.
that's another reason why you would want to make sure you're doing a cool down, so that you allow that recovery of the waste products in the legs to leave the body. Because if you go home and you don't have to take the time to actually start the removal of the waste products, you'll be very sore the next day.
Yeah, and typically you'll feel like heavy, you feel like sore, but if you do have a bit of that, it might even be active recovery, so you might even go for a walk a little bit afterwards, or if you're just, on a bike, you probably would then just cruise a little bit, let the blood sort of clear, and then move on. So, no, I really like that. Yeah, so they're the steps.
Yeah, I guess something I want to add as well is something I've always thought about the last couple of years as a strength and conditioning coach, is to make sure that athletes are training movements and not muscles.
Correct.
Because
Yep.
there was a really good quote. It was, when you train muscles, you forget movements. But if you train movements, you won't forget a muscle.
Exactly. And it's like, if you're doing bicep curls in your program, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but how does that actually transfer? If you're doing squats, if you're doing deadlifts, you're doing a bench press, how does that actually transfer into your sport? And I think that's really important. So as a bit of a conclusion, let me just quickly review. So the program, a successful youth athletic development program, should have a warm-up. Okay, mobility, so that ramp protocol: raise, activate, mobilize, potentiate, and prime. Then you got to have some sort of power or speed and agility, quickness movements. Yeah, jumping, sprinting, plyometrics, and all those sort of things should be in that, and making sure that it's at the level of the athlete, and technique is most important. And as the program progresses, we then move into sort of that more complexity, right? Then we move into some strength work. Again, squat, deadlift. It might be double leg, then single leg. We'd move into variations depending on where the athlete is at and level. And then horizontal push and pull, vertical push and pull. They're the movements. Let's attach them to actual exercises that's going to improve those movements. And we know that they're going to transfer nicely into our sporting movements. Then work on sort of your cardiovascular energy system work, okay, whether that's HIIT training, whether that's extra sessions throughout the week, going for runs or whatever it is. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we are cooling down, getting ready to recover, and finish the session feeling, not feeling too tight and all of that. We want to finish off feeling, nice and relaxed and calm and those sort of things.
Awesome. So if you're a parent or a coach or a youth athlete and your program looks like this, you're well on your way to the right direction that you want to go. So yeah, that's all from us. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. We really appreciate it. And share this with someone that would really value this podcast. See you on the next episode.
Thank you.
You have just listened to the Inner Athlete Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of weekly episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get great tips on all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.